Good morning, everybody. I will call this a final meeting of the Interim Judiciary Committee to order. Will the secretary please take the roll?
Senator Krasner, Senator Nguyen,
Here.
Assemblymember Cole, Assemblymember Gonzalez,
Here.
Assemblymember Marzola, Assemblymember Miller, Chair Scheibel.
I am here. Thank you. Assemblymember Gonzalez, do you have anybody else with you who you might want to introduce?
I do. Give me 1 second. Say hi. Oh, congratulations.
Congratulations. Oh,
What's her name? Saranya. Saranya, welcome. Thank you.
that is one very cute baby. All right, that was really all we needed to do today. Thank you. Thank you so much for sharing her with us. And again, congratulations and welcome Saranya and everybody to the final meeting of the Interim Judiciary Committee. We do have some business today. In addition to our work session, we have a couple of presentations. A couple of people reached out to me and kind of asked about the thinking behind that format. And the thinking is this, that we have a lot to cover in one interim for this large committee with so many different priorities and responsibilities. And so even though we already have a full work session document, I wanted to make sure that we also took the time to explore other policies that members here might be considering for their individual personal bills that the two committees might consider. We have the the Assembly Judiciary and Senate Judiciary both get committee bills. And so the earlier that we can get started talking about policy, I think the better it is for us to make good policy. And so we will have a couple of presentations today to talk through, like I said, some of those policy considerations. Plus, we have our work session where we will go over some of the things that we've already started considering for the next session and take votes on drafting BDRs, resolutions, letters, etc. But before we do any of that, we have some time for public comment. So I will invite anybody forward wishing to give public comment in person, either in Carson City or Las Vegas. I see some folks coming forward in Las Vegas, so we'll start here. Sorry, I see folks in Carson City as well, but I already said we'd start with Vegas. So we'll start with Las Vegas.
All right. Good morning, members of the Judiciary Committee. My name is Kev Galgano, and I want to talk about the fight against child sex trafficking here in Nevada. CSEC stands for the Commercial Sexual Exploitation of Children, and I recently became aware that this issue was prioritized at the March meeting for this committee. I have a summary of all the key points about child trafficking from the 5 previous meetings as well, which is part of my submission today. These minors are often between the ages of 12 to 14, and 11% of those include boys as well. Many of them come from chaotic households and end up running away because it is devastating to their mental health to remain at home. On average, it takes about 2 nights for child traffickers to find these runaways, since they know exactly where to look and what to say to them. In my submission materials, I have also put together a chart that shows resources in Nevada for rescuing a child from exploitation and how effective their current capabilities are. I have divided the resources into 3 distinct phases for accomplishing this objective. The first phase is detection, the ability to locate a trafficked child. The second phase is the actual separation from the trafficker. And finally, the third and most challenging phase is providing a long-term nurturing environment for undoing the psychological trauma involved. I regret to say that many kids don't just become victims of their traffickers, they become dependent on them. The trafficker is often the first person who ever made them feel chosen, protected, and provided for. This means that law enforcement and social workers represent people who want to take them away from the only stability that they've ever known. Although this isn't always the case, attempting to rescue a child who grew up in this way is dangerous for all parties involved. For the kids who really do want nothing to do with this way of life, I am confident that preparing a rescue system and a way out for them is possible with the right coordination and perseverance. I won't underestimate the tremendous potential of security officers who may also help with this cause once the issues with the Private Investigators Licensing Board are fully resolved. In my supporting materials, pages 1 to 5 highlight the key points of the CSEC discussions at the 5 previous Judiciary Committee meetings prior to today. And pages 6 to 7 is a chart evaluating Nevada's current capability to fight CSEC across 3 phases, whether a trafficked child is found, safely recovered, and healed for the long term. Once again, thanks for your time, always.
Good morning, Chair Scheibel and members of the Joint Interim Standing Committee on the Judiciary. My name is Nick Ciccone, and I am here today on behalf of the Clark County School District in strong support of the 5th recommendation related to electric bicycles and e-mobility devices. We're facing an urgent crisis on our roads. According to the School Traffic Safety Working Group's final report, student non-motorist crashes spiked 427 incidents in the 2025-2026 school year, a staggering 356% increase over the previous year. Near half of all these crashes, 49%, involved e-devices. Local medical providers at UMC and across Southern Nevada have seen up to a 400% increase in pediatric e-device injuries over recent years. Middle and high school students aged 12 to 17 account for 74% of all student incidents, with 14-year-olds suffering the single highest crash rate. This BDR provides the common sense guardrails our community desperately needs, including mandatory helmet protections, closing regulatory enforcement gaps when differentiating between different types of devices, and improved data collection so we understand when students or individuals are using an e-device involved in a motor accident. This legislation isn't about taking away mobility, it is about protecting our children's lives. I urge you to support this BDR. Thank you for your time.
Good morning, Chair Scheibel and members of the committee. My name is Lee McAllister. I'm the Executive Director of the Nevada chapter of the American Academy of Pediatrics. I'm here today to comment on the committee's human trafficking recommendations. The Nevada AAP submitted a letter yesterday asking that the final recommendations include support for Nevada Care, a statewide medical legal response network modeled on the Kansas Care Network, which has processed over 7,400 referrals with a 25-hour median response time since 2023. Nevada Care addresses 3 priorities: workforce retention, statewide coordination, and fair compensation for medical legal work, including courtroom testimony. Full details are in our letter to the committee. My next point I want to make this morning isn't in our letter, but given today's presentation on pregnancy outcome laws, it merits a call out. The American Academy of Pediatrics policy on adolescents' right to confidential care makes clear that when laws around pregnancy and abortion grow more punitive, young people delay or avoid seeking medical care out of fear, and that delay is itself a health risk. I'd encourage this committee to weigh that as it considers any related statutes. Thank you for your time and for the committee's work this interim.
Good morning, Chair and members of the Interim Judiciary Committee. Thank you for the opportunity to testify. Today, you will hear information about violence and reproductive access. These are important topics. I would ask you to consider the following. Nevada has a law requiring one-parent notification with judicial bypass prior to a minor receiving an abortion. The Nevada Supreme Court recently enjoined this law, meaning an underage girl can get an abortion without her parents even knowing. Concerns of doctors' convenience outweighed parents' right and safety of young girls in this decision. Parents are one of the most important safeguards against abuse, trafficking, exploitation, and coercion. And that is why I ask you today to fix Nevada's parental notification statute to once again include parents in their underage daughters' abortion decisions. Parents should know when their minor daughter is facing an abortion decision. And with the appropriate protections that are there, it protects her over her suspected abuser. Nevada should ensure that no woman or girl can be pressured, threatened, deceived, trafficked, or forced into an abortion. Because sometimes the adult who desperately does not want a mom or dad to know about a girl's pregnancy is the very adult who caused it. Secret abortions help hide the crime and return that child to abuse. Please consider using one of the Judiciary BDRs to fix NRS 442.255.
Good morning, members of the Judiciary Committee, and I hope you all are looking forward to a couple months off before February. My name is Mark Betancourt. I'm the Executive Director with the Nevada Coalition Against the Death Penalty. For the last time this interim, I want to encourage the members of this committee to again reconsider ending the death penalty in the coming legislative session. It is a costly public policy that is broken beyond repair, and it has no discernible benefit to the people of Nevada. Victims continue to step forward this year who do not want to suffer through decades of media and court appearances for a sentence that may never occur and likely never will. As of this year, we have gone 2 decades since the last execution in Nevada. And what do we have to show? A nearly $1 million execution chamber the legislature authorized that has never been used, and nearly $500,000 per death sentence sought versus a life or life without parole sentence. That money could be better serving our communities, solving crimes, or supporting victim services. We also know that because of a lack of resources, a lack of legal experts, and more, you are far more likely to receive a death sentence in Clark County or Washoe County than anywhere in the rest of the state. And how can we compare the victimhood in one region versus another? And we see this disparity happening not only in regionality, but across race and economic status of the folks who are sentenced to death. The closer we examine capital punishment, the less it makes sense. 11 of the 12 people in Nevada who have been executed were volunteers, people who waived their appeals. Is this the system that we want? One where we forgo questions about innocence, wasting millions in taxpayer dollars while people are struggling for something we know hasn't and continues to not work. If Lebanon, Sierra Leone, and Virginia can move past the death penalty, so can the sagebrush state. I invite any of our legislators, even those who are doubtful, to open up the dialogue and sit down for a conversation. We can better serve the people of this state without capital punishment and focusing on how we can prevent crime before it happens. Thank you so much.
All right, thank you all for your comments. I don't see anybody else coming forward in Las Vegas, so we will move to Carson City in person for public comment. Please go ahead.
Good morning, Chair Scheibel, members of the committee. Tanya Brown, TONJA-BROWN, Advocates for the Inmates and the Innocent. As you know, we had submitted our recommendation that consisted of a factual innocence posthumous petition and to change the law of discovery to an open file. We realize that there are a lot of good recommendations, and we would hope that one of the members would at least, pick up our recommendation and move forward with one of their BDRs. And so also, we would also like it known that there's a lot of great recommendations, and our priorities for the recommendations would be to advance SB 307, anti-insolidary confinement, what the public defenders are asking for, FAM, fines and fees, and my colleague is on the phone, and I think she would be the best person to speak on behalf of the excited delirium and prone restraints, excuse me. And I'd like to touch on what Mr. Betancourt had said of abolishing the death penalty. About a week or so, we sent each of you a letter, and our reasons why. One was on behalf of Advocates for the Inmates, and one was because of a personal, from me personally, abolishing the death penalty. Many years ago, I always believed that they would never convict an innocent person, and we know that that is not the case. And I know because my brother was wrongfully convicted, spent 21 years in prison for a crime he did not commit, and prior to the discovery of all the evidence that was found hiding in the Washoe County DA's file, and me finding the real perpetrator of the crime, I'm still unable to exonerate him. But I want you to know something. If hypothetically, if the suspect had actually murdered somebody in which my brother was wrongfully convicted of, my brother would have been executed because all of his appeals were finished, finalized, long before the last execution of 2006. So I really would like for you to think about that when considering abolishing the death penalty, because like I said, if the person that I did find later on, and I do have a declaration from that that will support my brother's innocence, if he had committed a murder, my brother would have been dead. And the death penalty needs to be abolished. Thank you very much. Have a lovely day.
Good morning, legislatures. My name is William J. Connors, William, John, John, Connors. I'm here for citizens of participatory justice. My name is Will Connors. I am here for two reasons. First, I want to put a record that I have submitted comments and a white paper to produce some friends of mine. I have handed it over to the Secretary for submission, a white paper, along with a cover letter requesting legislative gap analysis and some comments by the authors of the white paper. Second, I would also like to place into record that I have turned in a public comment writing regarding the general complaints about lawyers and attorneys as it relates to civil rights. Third, I would like to make a verbal comment. The food at Ely State Prison is not worth eating because of the lack of Class A protein, and it's filled with carbs like macaroni, bread, and cake. The area the prison is in is surrounded by farms and gardens that could be a source with fresh vegetables and meats and could be a better price. I hope you will at least consider this so my husband and other inmates don't have to keep eating the garbage they're eating. Also, my husband hasn't been outside since he was moved to Ely State Prison in January to get any fresh air or a little sun on his face. And I really need you guys to listen to me. He was locked down all last week in his cell for 5 days. And I don't understand why they move a whole bunch of people to Ely State Prison and then they can't control the situation. They should have been at least getting out during the day and not just on the tier, but outside so they can get fresh air. And I'm really upset about this. And I'm not only speaking for my husband, but I'm also speaking for those other inmates that don't have a voice. I thank you very much for I'm thanking you for listening to what I have to say. And I'll be back, of course, because there's a lot of reasons that I need to talk about. And I'm really upset about this, and I'm hoping the legislature will look at this honestly. Thank you very much. Have a nice day.
I don't see anybody else coming forward in person, so we'll go to the phone for public comment.
To provide public comment, please press *9 now to take your place in the queue.
Good morning, Chair Scheibel and members of the committee. My name is Anne-Marie Grant, and I speak today as the sister of Thomas Purdy, who died a preventable death while in the custody at the Washoe County Jail. Thomas was experiencing a mental health crisis. Instead of receiving care, he was hogtied face down until he suffocated. His death was ruled asphyxiation due to restraint, yet the Washoe County Medical Examiner, Laura Knight, described it as excited delirium, a term now rejected by every major medical association. The recommendations before this committee to prohibit excited delirium as a medical diagnosis and ban prone and hog-tie restraint for life-saving measures. They address practices that have already cost lives in Nevada, including my brother's. Families like mine have watched this pattern repeat across Nevada. People restrained face down, denied medical aid, and later their murders described as excited delirium instead of positional asphyxiation. These deaths are preventable, and the settlements that follow are a direct cost to taxpayers. I'd like to mention Nicholas Farah was also asphyxiated at the Clark County Detention Center on March 31st, 2019. That lawsuit cost the taxpayers $2.35 million. He was not included on the list that was provided to the committee. Nevada must join states like California and Colorado in establishing uniform statewide protections against restraint practices that restrict breathing and adopting laws that restrict pressure to the neck, back, chest, or abdomen, and mandate prompt repositioning, medical evaluation, and independent investigations of restraint-related deaths. This will protect both the public and law enforcement officers. Thomas deserved help, not a death sentence. These reforms are necessary to prevent positional asphyxia deaths and to ensure that behavioral or medical crises receive an appropriate medical response rather than a deadly restraint. A statewide ban protects both the public and agencies by establishing clear uniform standards for safe restraint, medical evaluation, and independent investigations. I'd also urge you to consider legislation to abolish the death penalty. Thank you. Have a good day.
Good morning, Chair Scheibel and committee. My name is Sue Birch, SUEBURTCH, and I am the Executive Director of the Nevada State Chapter of the National Organization for Women, and I'm also a member of the Economic Justice Work Group. I'm calling about item 4 on the agenda. We are in total support of repealing NRS 200.220, criminal ban on self-managed abortion, and NRS 201.150, concealing a birth. For all the work we've done in Nevada on reproductive rights, it's appalling that these are still on the books. And after hearing today's presentation, we think you will feel the same. We also want to concur with the comments made by Ms. McAllister on human trafficking and by Mr. Betancourt on the death penalty. Thank you for your time.
Good morning. My name is Ashley Shedd, and I'm here today to ask you to take a stand and end the death penalty in Nevada. I have never believed that taking another life is the answer to even the most terrible harm, but I didn't fully understand the weight of the death penalty until it affected me personally. I have a loved one on Nevada's death row. I'm not here to excuse the horrific tragedies that brought anyone to prison. Accountability matters. Victims matter. But I believe we can hold people accountable without taking another life. My loved one was 19 years old at the time of his offense. He was experiencing profound psychological distress, was deep in his substance abuse, and experts determined that his reasoning capacity was comparable to that of a 10-year-old. Think about who you were at 19. How much have you changed since then? How differently do you think, make decisions, and understand consequences today? If we recognize growth and maturity in our own lives, how can we decide that someone is irreparably corrupted and should be put to death by the state? The death penalty does not make our justice system more just. It is plagued by racial and economic disparities. It's expensive, and it carries an irreversible consequence in a system we know makes mistakes. The studies have been done. The data is there. Decades of research have failed to establish the death penalty as an effective deterrent to crime. Yet we are living in a time when science, research, and evidence are increasingly being ignored in major policy decisions. Nevada should not join that trend. When the evidence tells us a policy is ineffective, we should have the courage to change it. People can be held accountable for the harm they caused and still be capable of change. Nevada does not need to kill someone to demonstrate that we value justice. And we can choose humanity and believe that no one is beyond redemption. And that's the Nevada I hope we choose to be. Thank you for your time.
Good morning, Chair, Vice Chair, members of the committee. This is Dora Martinez.
members of the Nevada Disability Peer Action Coalition. Chair, please excuse my ignorance if I'm speaking out of terms. I was trying to get the items on your work session number D. I believe it's about e-bike. I hope that if this will be one of the if this is a BDR, please put strong perimeters on it. As you know, I'm blind and I have a guide dog, and sometimes the e-bikers and bicyclists, they just whisk on by us, and sometimes they can hurt my dog. And when my dog is hurt in the middle of the sidewalk or the crosswalk, because they do that too, the bicyclist, it could be dangerous to me and my service dog. And just a reminder that we do in Nevada, thank God, there is a NRS 426.790 and 810 that gives safety to the service animals. But I just, to prevent that, I don't want anything happen to my dog, because as you know, veterinarian bills are very expensive, and I just do not want my dog to get harmed simply because he is guiding me as a blind individual. And I sincerely hope that the accessibility team can give me the agenda item that I can read more, because it's not accessible as of now. Thank you, Chair. Take care.
We have no additional callers on the line for public comment.
All right, thank you so much. That takes us to the end of agenda item number 2. We'll move on to agenda item number 3, approval of the minutes from the March 10th meeting. Unless there are comments, questions, I would accept a motion to approve the minutes. All right, we have a motion. I'll take the motion from Vice Chair Miller. I'll take the second from Senator Nguyen. Any discussion on the motion? Seeing none, all in favor say aye. Aye. Any opposed, nay? All right, the motion carries. We have approved the minutes from the March 10th meeting. All right, and with that, we'll move on to our next agenda item. We did have a request to flip the order of our presentations, and so we will start with agenda item number 5, a presentation on the audit of the Nevada Department of Corrections from Mr. Stevenson. Please go ahead when you're ready.
Good morning, Chair Scheibel and members of the committee. For the record, Craig Stevenson. I'm the administrator of the Division of Internal Audits. Thank you, Chair Scheibel, for inviting me to give an overview of the recent work we completed at the Nevada Department of Corrections. I really do appreciate the opportunity to present our findings to this committee and to present the recommendations we issued to the department. I want to start by directing committee members' attention to the exhibit attached to this agenda item, which is the Administrative Review Report issued on July 9th, 2026. The report is 52 pages, so I'll do my best to keep this presentation as brief as possible and focus on high-level findings and recommendations. So at the request of the governor and the Executive Branch Audit Committee, the Division of Internal Audits reviewed timesheets and pay practices at High Desert State Prison and collective bargaining agreements applicable to Department of Corrections employees. Findings resulting from the review have been grouped into 2 chapters in the report. Chapter 1 begins on page 2. It addresses notable timesheet coding errors and findings related to department pay practices. We reviewed approximately 11,000 timesheets over 19 pay periods in fiscal year 2026. Over 5,000 timesheet errors were identified, resulting in both underpayments and overpayments to employees. As a result, the department made 2,600 pay adjustments. Timesheets were largely found to be poorly documented. Shift times were often missing or indiscernible. Hours coded often did not match the shift times, and eligibility for special pay coded often conflicted with the shift documented. Poorly documented timesheets prevent supervisors and pay clerks from determining whether time is coded correctly and that the employee is paid correctly. Overtime, for example, is a deviation from a standard shift requiring details to substantiate the hours worked. However, we identified over 800 instances in which time coded as overtime conflicted with information documented in the timesheet. Thousands of other errors highlight deficiencies in both employee comprehension of timesheet coding requirements and the review and approval process performed by supervisors and pay clerks. On page 8 of the report, we note that over 2,000 errors were made relating to shift differential pay, which resulted in pay adjustments. Shift differential pay is a type of premium pay for working less desirable hours. It typically starts in the afternoon or the evening. At High Desert State Prison, shift differential pay, the qualifying period, starts at 1 p.m. as an example. Shift differential pay is often coded by employees not entitled to it and missing when it was due to the employee for working a qualifying schedule. Page 9 of the report discloses hundreds of muster pay coding errors that resulted in pay adjustments. Muster time is 45 minutes of overtime pay that correctional officers receive every day they show up to work. Muster time was often missing from days worked and improperly included on days not worked. Additionally, some correctional officers coded more than 24 hours per day when accounting for muster pay and standby time. This practice indicates that muster pay is viewed as a pay entitlement rather than compensation for the time it takes to travel to and from a post in a correctional facility before and after the assigned shift. Some officers arrived late to their posts, but still claimed 45 minutes of muster pay. Beginning on page 14 of the report, we discuss the complexities of coding various types of holiday pay. We found that holiday pay was frequently coded incorrectly on employee timesheets, indicating a pattern of confusion among employees, supervisors, and pay clerks alike. This is most likely due to the large number of pay codes used by the department and a lack of training and possibly the 24-hour nature of prison operations, where employees work shifts that often span the midnight to midnight legal holiday hours. And certain other errors were less prevalent, but nonetheless reflected deficient timesheet coding and review process. For example, on page 16 of the report, we identify a novel practice of overtime hours being flexed to offset AWOL or unpaid leave time. Correctional officers sometimes work one or more overtime shifts in the same pay period as AWOL time or unpaid leave time, and then they code the overtime hours as regular time on the days absent. This cumbersome practice of flexing overtime to cover unpaid absences often leads to coding more or less time on a timesheet than is actually worked. Chapter 1 of the report included 5 recommendations to improve timesheet coding and the timesheet review and approval process. Recommendation 1.1 is to enforce timesheet coding requirements. Recommendation 1.2 is to update and clarify timesheet coding guidance. Recommendation 1.3 is to augment timesheet training provided to both employees and the trainees, mainly correctional officer trainees. Recommendation 1.4 is to investigate instances of suspected timesheet abuse. And recommendation 1.5 is to install badge readers at staff entrances. That concludes chapter 1. Chapter 2 begins on page 21 of the report and pertains to collective bargaining agreements or CBAs. These CBAs that I'm going to discuss are applicable to most of the Department of Corrections employees. Chapter 2 addresses vague provisions of the CBAs that fail to provide sufficient guidance for implementing the agreement provisions. Vague language relying heavily on legal interpretation does not help the employees dependent on the agreement terms, nor does it help promote a shared understanding between parties to the agreement. Findings related to muster pay granted by the CBAs begin on page 22 of the report. Notably, the CBAs entitle correctional officers to payment of 45 minutes of muster time for every day worked, regardless of post or work assignment. This contradicts the fact that muster time was granted specifically to account for the time needed to walk to and from the gatehouse to the assigned post and exchange pass-down instructions before and after a shift. Officers assigned duties other than a standard post, such as assignment to hospital, training, or honor guard, are receiving muster pay outside of its originally intended purpose. Narrowing muster pay eligibility at High Desert State Prison alone would save the state over $200,000 annually, as shown on page 24 of the report. Beginning on page 25 of the report, we discuss the impact of the CBAs defining eligibility for shift differential pay based on the shift assigned rather than the hours worked. Eligibility for shift differential pay, as outlined in the CBAs, is based on arbitrary shift designations, which vary from one correctional facility to another. Simply calling a shift swing shift renders it eligible regardless of the start and end times of the shift. This practice differs from state regulations and other CBAs that designate eligibility for shift differential pay based upon the specific hours worked. Beginning on page 27 of the report, we discuss several provisions of the CBAs related to holiday pay, which insufficiently address the complexities of coding holiday time. The vague CBA provisions do not fully consider the unique circumstances encountered at a 24-hour correctional facility. Correctional employees are expected to work holidays, and night shift employees will perform work both in partial shifts and multiple shifts within that legal midnight to midnight holiday window. Lastly, and perhaps most importantly, on page 31 of the report, we note that the CBAs allow employees to work excessive hours indefinitely. Missing from the CBAs are terms limiting the maximum number of hours a correctional officer may work in any given time frame. Currently, correctional officers are allowed to work double shifts of 16 hours and 45 minutes indefinitely, which presents health and safety concerns. In Appendix E on page 52 of this report, it's the very last page, we show the timesheet of an employee that worked every day of the pay period. The employee worked several 16-hour double shifts, then 2 12-hour shifts on their days off, followed by a 20-hour shift, and then reported to their next shift 4 hours later, which is very concerning. The CBAs do not restrict the number of consecutive shifts or overtime hours that a correctional officer may work. The department intends to work with the union representing correctional officers to limit excessive hours by creating a memorandum of understanding. Prior to the CBAs taking effect, correctional officers could not work 16-hour shifts for more than 2 consecutive days. There are 5 recommendations made in Chapter 2 of the report, which are shown on page 34. Each recommendation requires coordination with the Division of Human Resource Management. Recommendation 2.1 is to negotiate and clarify eligibility for muster pay. Recommendation 2.2 is to establish shift differential pay eligibility criteria based on hours worked rather than assigned shifts. Recommendation 2.3 is to clarify holiday pay provisions. Recommendation 2.4 is to establish limits on the number of hours that may be worked in one day and over consecutive periods of time. And recommendation 2.5 is to clarify rural pay eligibility. For your information, the department submitted a response and implementation plan for all recommendations issued, which is shown in Appendix B of the report starting on page 39. The report was released to the Executive Branch Audit Committee and made publicly available on July 9th, 2026. The Division of Internal Audits will follow up on the status of all recommendations in January of 2027. This concludes my presentation, and I'm happy to answer any questions the committee may have.
Thank you so much for that presentation. We will start with questions up here in Las Vegas. Oh, maybe we don't have any. Senator Nguyen?
Thank you. And I don't know if you have the answer to this, but I know that they recently got their staff study completed finally after a couple years delay and reinstituting it, that made recommendations for like staffing needs and staffing changes. So this audit, are you able to take into consideration how some of those proposed changes would affect some of the outcomes that they might have in the future? Or am I asking you to have a crystal ball?
No, I think I can take a shot at it. Regarding that staffing study, my understanding is there's some 800 positions short, according to the staffing study. So if we think that overtime is going to be reduced without filling a significant number of positions, that's just not possible. In order to reduce overtime specifically at High Desert State Prison, they would have to fill remaining vacant positions. The interesting thing about that staffing study is that it proposes even more positions. And so one of the questions that legislators have asked in the past is when NDOC asks for more positions, is they say, well, you haven't filled your current positions, so why would we give you more positions? And so NDOC has to fill the current vacancies and then essentially ask for more positions to reduce overtime further, because they'll still rely on overtime, specifically at High Desert State Prison. And so the overtime issue is not something that's going to go away just by reducing vacancies. They would also have to get some new positions in order to completely reduce that. And that's a very difficult thing to do.
And if I can just follow up, Chair, if that's okay. Thank you. When you're talking about, and you may have mentioned this, and I'm sure it's in the study, do you know what the average, obviously this came to our attention, at least in during session on the money committees, because we realized that there were employees that were working, as you explained, like crazy amounts of hours, which I had concerns about safety, all kinds of things in addition to potential fraud. Do you know what the average salary is for all NDOT, like correction staff at like High Desert, for example, where it seems like majority of the abuses are the majority of the overtime use is there?
I could look that up. I do not know off the top of my head what the average salary is. Now, if you're comparing prison to prison, I could give you a little bit of insight, which is that the officers working at High Desert State Prison, there's more vacancies there, in my opinion, because they have to drive about, depending on where you live in Las Vegas, right, 30 minutes to an hour. If you live where I lived in Henderson, it'd take about an hour to get to High Desert State Prison. If you live on the north end of town, maybe 30 minutes. And that's kind of a tough sell to make someone commute that kind of distance all the way out to the prison. I can also tell you, having visited the prison numerous times throughout this review that we did, that because High Desert is Nevada's maximum security prison, right? It has some of the roughest offenders. It's a difficult place to work. It's a difficult environment to work in. On my tour, one of the many tours that I took through there were feces being thrown outside of jail cells. There was a cell extraction that I witnessed where someone was fighting 3 correctional officers. It's a dangerous environment, and that's probably the most dangerous of the prisons. It's also the largest prison by far. I think there's about double the number of correctional officers and probably about double the number of inmates at that prison than any other prison. And so that's why I think High Desert experiences a tougher time filling those vacancies.
Thank you. If it's possible, I might follow up with you afterward to find out whether or not there is, if it's available to look at that information. I guess what I'm wondering is I know what we have allocated for the salaries for these state workers, but I'm curious what their actual amount that we are paying them when we look at overtime costs. Just trying to figure out where all that money goes from and whether or not we are potentially paying one person with overtime and we could conceivably hire 2 or 3 other people at whatever the standard pay is. So thank you so much.
Sure.
All right, I think Assemblymember Hanson had a question. Please go ahead.
Thank you, and thank you for being here. I wanted to clarify a little bit on the first part of the report where you were talking about the flexing overtime being used sometimes to offset the absence without leave or following proper protocol. So, and I appreciate Senator Wynn's questions because diving into some of the things she was trying to flesh out, I think are really important for us to try to get a grip on understanding how we can really be effective on this. So when it comes to, if you could define what flexing means, I mean, I think I understand, but I think just to get on the record and for the public that might be listening so that they might understand, what do we mean by flexing in this term, in this instance?
Sure. So in this instance, and generally, I would say for classified employees at the state, when you flex time, you don't work a certain amount of time on one day, and then you work a corresponding amount of time on a different day. So in this particular instance, I'll give you an example. Let's say a correctional officer called out on a Monday, and it wasn't pre-approved leave, and maybe they didn't have any sick leave or annual leave to cover that. They might miss a 8-hour, 10-hour, 12-hour shift. We'll say an 8-hour shift. What they would do is come in on, say, a Friday and work 8 hours of overtime to cover that unpaid absence on a Monday. So they will flex that time from one day to cover the unpaid absence on the other day to make sure that they hit a base number of 80 hours in a pay period so that they don't get short paid on their paycheck.
Thank you. I appreciate you clarifying that. So when I looked at the recommendations, and again, if you could maybe give us an example, how are you going to, how is the system going to catch that in real time? By the coding, it seemed like that was what the suggestion might be. If that's the answer, who's doing the coding? I'm just trying to understand how we're going to catch this in real time rather than later when we have to ask for an audit.
Yeah, absolutely. That's a great question. So, and to kind of unpack that, who does the coding? It's the correctional officers. So the correctional officers will go into the Nevada Employee Action and Timekeeping System. We call it NEATS. And that's where they'll submit a pay period. So they'll do the actual coding on a timesheet in NEATS. The second part of your question regarding how do we catch that? How do we affect changes and not look at this after the fact and say, hey, you did this wrong? I want to speak to that by saying, one, they were never prevented or prohibited from that practice. That was a common and accepted practice. And so that wasn't really a concern. And at the end of the day, the money, the paycheck is right. So if you miss 8 hours here, but you work 8 hours here, the paycheck amount will be right. And so it wasn't really a concern. I would say the bigger concern is that it's causing pay clerks and supervisors reviewing timesheets to have to do the math. And frequently the math of the flex time, it doesn't summate. And so they'll say, I was out for 8 hours on Monday, and then I worked 6 hours of overtime on Friday, right? And they'll just cancel that out. And so that's the bigger concern from my perspective. Now, moving forward, NDOC is going to create some, I guess you could call them pay policies to restrict this practice of flexing AWOL time for overtime. And what they're going to have the correctional officers do is code the AWOL time on the day they're AWOL, and then on the day that they work overtime to code what's called PRT, paid regular time, on that day. That way they don't have to try and wash those hours. So the time will be right, essentially. I don't think this practice of flexing AWOL time for overtime is going to go away. I don't have a problem particularly with the practice because it allows employees to hit the base 80 hours. And if they didn't hit that base 80 hours, you'd have to pay another employee overtime. And so I would say that that's not my main concern. My bigger concern is the transparency of it and making sure that the amounts actually do flex or wash out so that the employee's paycheck is correct.
Thank you. That really helped to have that kind of explanation and detail. And thank you, Chair. That's it for me.
Thank you. Other questions from our members afar, meaning on Zoom? All right, I don't see any. I have a couple of questions as well, and I'll pick up where Assemblymember Hanson left off. I think, Mr. Stevenson, you were giving a really good example of like an employee who is supposed to work an 8-hour shift on Monday and doesn't work that shift, and so they pick up another shift later. And I want to understand, is it supposed to be, if my normal shift is, say, an 8-hour shift from noon to 8 p.m. on Monday, and instead I go in on Friday and work from noon to 8 p.m., am I supposed to get paid the exact same amount?
Yes, that's a great question. So what you're saying is you're working overtime on Friday, shouldn't you get time and a half? And the answer is no. And the reason you wouldn't get that time and a half on Friday is because you didn't hit your base 80 hours of regular time. And so you have to flex it or wash it with those hours missed on the Monday. And that is correct. That is what we want to see. What we don't want to see is someone calling out AWOL on that Monday, working 8 hours on a shift that they aren't scheduled for and getting the time and a half rate.
And is that what we're seeing? Is that they're getting the time and a half rate on that second shift that should be paid at the base rate?
There were a few examples of that. I would say that's not overall the general issue with this finding. We did find numerous examples where the math didn't add up. So they missed 8 hours, or a better example would be they missed 12 hours because that's a shift. They came in and worked an 8-hour overtime shift and they washed both of those. And so obviously the 8 hours doesn't wash the 12-hour shift. That wasn't really super common. I would say the bigger issue is that there aren't really controls in place to make sure that the time was actually worked. And then there's bigger concerns over when somebody calls out AWOL, they have to backfill that position at time and a half. And so that could be costly to the state. Now, you could argue that when the officer comes in and works overtime later in the week on a shift that they would be backfilling anyways, then it kind of washes. And so them being so understaffed at the moment, that isn't a concern. But if they were fully staffed, that would be a bigger concern because now you're paying time and a half to backfill a position.
Okay, I think I'm following. That basically, I think what you're saying is like if two employees basically switch shifts, I was supposed to work Monday, Senator Wynn was supposed to work Friday. Instead, Senator Wynn works Monday, I work Friday, but then both are getting paid overtime for those shifts because they're backfilling them. Am I understanding that right?
So if, let's say that you did not hit your 80 base regular hours, let's say you were scheduled 5 8-hour shifts for 2 weeks in a pay period, and you guys just swapped shifts, it'd all be fine. It would, all the math would even out. That wouldn't be a concern. And they frequently do that. They have a procedure for shifts swapping. So that wouldn't be a concern. What we're finding in this AWOL issue particularly, maybe I could speak a little bit more to why it's happening. So the reason why it's happening is correctional officers will use up their leave balances. And then they'll get to a point where they need to call out sick on, say, a Monday, but they don't have any leave balance. And so really their only option is to come in and work an extra, say, 8 hours later in the week to cover that missed time, because if they don't cover that missed time, they're actually going to get paid for less than 80 hours, less than a normal paycheck. And so that's kind of why this is happening. If you trade shifts, it washes. That's not a concern. And again, this would be a bigger concern if they were fully staffed and they had someone to cover every shift, and then somebody calls out and picks up a different shift. Now they're working a shift that doesn't need to be worked, and you would have to have someone backfill that first shift at time and a half. In that case, you'd be paying a 50% premium to cover that AWOL time. As it stands right now, pretty much no matter what, anyone who picks up a shift outside of the regular shift schedules is going to be working overtime because they're so understaffed.
Okay, I think I understand. I have a related question. I'm looking at that chart that you pointed out to us on page 15 with, I don't know, what is this, 10, 12 different codes for holiday pay. And I'm wondering if part of the problem is also that we're not trading shifts one for one, because that Monday shift that somebody is calling out is not paid at the same rate as the Saturday shift, or the next Monday is a holiday and that's still within their pay period and they're trying to make it up. So can you speak a little bit to whether different shifts get paid at different rates, not accounting for overtime, but just because of the timing of the shift or the holidays?
Certainly, that's a really good question, because there's some nuance there that I think that you're pointing out. So let's say that you're a night shift employee, you get what's called paid shift differential. And so you get a 5% premium for working that night shift. Now, the interesting thing about this collective bargaining agreement is that if someone who normally works day shift fills in for you on that night shift, they actually don't get shift differential pay. So they actually get paid less than somebody that's on night shift in terms of paid shift differential. Now, the opposite of that is also true. Let's say that you're a night shift employee and you come in and you fill a day shift. Believe it or not, you get that 5% premium for working that day shift, even though it's not during the undesirable hours that would typically be awarded that 5% pay premium. And just for your edification, normal state employee, classified state employees, they get paid shift differential between 6 p.m. and 7 a.m. if they work between those hours. And so this CBA is really unique. Additionally, the AFSCME CBAs, to the best of my knowledge, most of them, if not all of them, pay shift differential between 6 p.m. and 7 a.m. So that really makes this FOP CBA that's applicable to correctional officers unique. They also get shift differential paid when they're on, say, annual leave, which is interesting, or sick leave, or on holiday time if their normal shift qualifies for it. Back to this holiday time issue that you pointed out on page 15 in this exhibit, there are premium pays for working on a holiday. So certainly if you're one of the employees that works on the holiday, you are going to get premium pay. But I would argue that it doesn't matter which employee does it, you're going to get that premium pay regardless, just for showing up to work on the holiday.
Okay, I think that makes sense. I just have one other kind of set of questions, if you will indulge me. Kind of at the very beginning of this document, I'm on page 4 of 52 with the timesheets and adjustments. If I'm reading this correctly, you analyzed roughly 11,000 timesheets. and there were errors in roughly 5,000 of them. So that's just under 50%. Am I missing something?
Just one little clarification. There were about that many errors. Actually, the errors were only prevalent in about a quarter of the timesheets. So as 2,600 timesheets had errors. So in fact, there were about 2 errors per incorrect timesheet. So it was about a quarter of all timesheets had to be submitted for pay adjustments because they had errors.
Okay. And I really don't know if you can answer this question or not, but is that a normal error rate for state employees?
I mean, so I haven't audited all state employees, but I'm just going to say, using my common sense and judgment, that and 13 years of working for the state as an auditor, that this is not common at all. This is extremely high, but I don't have the data to support that, other than my own experience reviewing employee timesheets.
I think that is still helpful to understand. And I'm sure this is in the document, but do you have, and I apologize, it didn't jump out at me. Do you have an estimated amount of money that these errors cost us?
So that's the $1 million question. The short answer is no. The long answer is we are working on getting that amount. So right now, our limitation is the core NV system that we're rolling out. We are trying to create a custom, like an ad hoc report, if you will, to identify the net effect of these pay adjustments. That is something that everybody wants. It's something that we worked on before we issued this audit. It's the $1 million question. We do not have that information, unfortunately.
I understand. I'm sorry, I do have one more question. Is your audit also able to track timesheets across employees? Like, are you able to identify particular employees who happen to have particularly high error rates on their timesheets?
Yes, we do. And yes, we did. So there were a couple of employees whose names I won't mention, who habitually submitted errant timesheets. And so what we did when we noticed a pattern is, when we referred those to the Department of Correction, we referred all timesheets that needed a pay adjustment, but there were certain timesheets where we noticed the same name over multiple pay periods. So we would then tell Department of Corrections about those employees, what we observed, and it was on the Department of Corrections to then discipline that employee. Now, if you're wondering how that process happened, we have, and we still do have, but we instituted a biweekly meeting that included me, Department of Corrections payroll team, and then the Division of Human Resource Management, including their leadership and staff working on this. And every 2 weeks, we discuss the most prevalent issues impacting NDOC timesheets. Now, something I didn't mention in my presentation is that we are still reviewing certain timesheets at Department of Corrections. And additionally, we are looking at timesheets not just at High Desert State Prison, but at Northern Nevada Correctional Center, Ely State Prison, and Lovelock Correctional Center. And so this work is sort of ongoing. We did report on it, and we set a cutoff date to make it to our audit committee, but we're still actually kind of knee deep in NDOC timesheets. And that's at the request of the governor, because we want to fix this problem, and we want to bring some accountability to this timesheet process. And we don't want to just look at High Desert. We want to look at the other institutions as well.
Thank you so much. That was exactly what I was asking. And so I very, very much appreciate you diving into that. I think we do have one more clarification from Assemblymember Hansen up north. Go ahead.
Thank you, Chair, for another chance. I know that a lot of us were wondering what the pay is, and I didn't expect you to have that available, but I did do a Google search. And so Nevada Department of Corrections officers are in the top 5 in the nation. I think and I'm really just saying this just for the education of all of us, that we're there with, it's California, Rhode Island, Massachusetts, New Jersey, and then Illinois and Nevada are tied for 5th place. But I think I have a prison in my district, Lovelock Prison, with a lot more staffing needs, but a different population, granted, and a commute that can be an hour and a half from the Reno-Sparks area. So there are so many factors, I think, that are going into this that I'm glad that we're really looking into and dialing in on high desert. But I think something that's really bothersome when we're thinking about, okay, are we paying a good wage to these correction officers? But what's the disconnect? And the disconnect is 25%, and then as of July 1st, it'll be 30% of that officer's pay goes into PERS, with 45% of those dollars going to pay past debt on that unfunded mandate for the system. The enormous unfunded liability. So not that you can fix that. That's more a discussion I think that's going to be ongoing, because I think we can rightfully say we're paying them well, but PERS is now, as of July 1st, going to be taking out, or maybe it was 25 it happened. July 1st of 2025, that jumped from 25.75% to the PERS to 30%. So that means an officer in his take home he's having to give, he went from like $1,700 a month going to PERS now $2,000. Now, granted, that will be a benefit that they will see in the future, but living day to day and the cost of living and such now is a real issue for them, I'm sure. And I have heard that from some that are in the system that have lamented some of this. So I'm just kind of putting that out there, that it is very complex. I think Nevada can say, well, we have moved the bar up in pay, but dealing with the PERS contribution, it seems, and maybe you've heard that. I don't know if it's an auditor, if you see that sort of disconnect, and does that can that also be an indicator of maybe why some of these officers want to do more overtime, want to do some of this other stuff to augment missing that 30% in their day-to-day living, because it's going to be put away for the future. So feel free to opine, but you don't necessarily have to. I just wanted to kind of put that out there.
Sure. Well, I wanted to add that I just very quickly looked up the correctional officer pay range. So correctional officers, now I'm not talking about trainees or sergeants, I'm just talking about the correctional officer position. They make between $68,000 and $100,000. The $68,000 is a step 1, according to the HR source that I'm looking at right now. The $100,000 is at a step 10, meaning you have 9 years of experience unless you were brought in at an accelerated pay rate. And so that's kind of the range you're playing with in terms of base salary. To your point, PERS is a killer. Especially, not that you have to have a college degree for correctional officers, but I'll say that young folks or folks right out of college get the sticker shock when you find out for normal classified employees, it's about 20%. I believe it's 19.25 comes straight off the top of your paycheck, and that's a killer. Police and fire, to your point, is much more. And so that hurts. Now, you asked about overtime compensation and do they kind of rely on that? Absolutely. I interviewed correctional officers at High Desert, and one of them his words were, "Don't take away our overtime." And they want that overtime. I don't think I'm speaking out of turn saying that. It certainly is, you got to remember overtime isn't being taxed right now. It's not subject to PERS withholding, right? And so that 50% overtime premium does a lot. It goes a long way when you compare it to the base salary that both gets taxed and hits PERS. And so that overtime, I think it's not a stretch to say it's very important to the correctional officers, and it's a huge component of their pay. I would also like to note that while the correctional officers get a number of other employment benefits that most state employees do not get. For example, they get a large recruitment bonus if you're a new correctional officer. They get uniform and tool allowances. Now, you may not consider that pay, but it's pretty generous in the CBAs what they get. They also get personal leave days that other employees like my staff do not get. They also get union leave days that we do not get. And so I would say there's a number of ancillary benefits that they do receive that I would say normal classified state employees do not receive. But to your point, the PERS is huge, and it definitely, I think, hurts specifically the newer correctional officers, just because if you're making the 68,000 and 30% is going, it hurts a little bit more. Whereas if you're capped out and you're making that 100,000, maybe you can absorb that a little bit easier than a brand new employee.
All right. Thank you so much. We really do appreciate all of those clarifications and all of your time with us this morning. Unless there are other questions. All right. I think that concludes this agenda item. I'll close out agenda item number 5. We will go back to agenda item number 4 with our presentation on reproductive access in Nevada. Looks like we have our presenters on Zoom. Please go ahead when you're ready.
Okay. Good morning, Chair and members of the committee. Thank you so much for the opportunity to be here today to talk about the statewide economic justice work group, our policy pillars, and the intersections that reproductive access has with violence prevention. I'm Serena Evans. I'm the policy director for the Nevada Coalition to End Domestic and Sexual Violence. Let's see. There we go. Okay. So formed in 2021, our statewide economic justice work group brings together what I like to call non-traditional violence prevention partners to address systems and policies in Nevada that increase economic opportunities and access. And so when I mean non-traditional violence prevention partners, we're not partnering with victim advocates and sexual assault and domestic violence programs. We're partnering with community agencies working on things such as housing access, access to healthcare, and reproductive access. And so this work group was formed in response to the research from the CDC. They have a Stop Sexual Violence technical package. And in that package, they specifically identified that increasing economic opportunities as a protective factor can reduce the risk of both violence, victimization, and perpetration. And so we convened this robust work group, and it looks at macro level prevention efforts across Nevada. So looking at things like systemic barriers, policies, and programs that can expand access to opportunities and resources for all Nevadans. And at its core, this work group, made up of about, I think I want to say 28 unique organizations, recognizes that preventing violence requires us to look beyond the individual behavior and really address the systems and conditions that are shaping people's daily lives. So the work group itself is comprised of organizational partners across the state, in every corner of the state, and operates on the core values of uplifting lived experiences of victim survivors and our everyday Nevadans, reducing systemic and policy barriers, collaborating with community, and it is rooted in increasing community safety for everyone. Over the years, the work group has worked collaboratively to identify 5 priority areas surrounding economic access based on the most pressing issues facing victim survivors in our communities. And so our five pillars being housing, which includes easy access to safe and affordable housing, tenant rights, as well as emergency shelter, workers' rights, so livable wages, paid family leave, child care and benefits, healthcare, meaning access to affordable mental and physical health care, as well as appropriate screening within our healthcare systems, revenue, being how we spend our money and the need for increased dollars to the state general budget to appropriately fund things like prevention programming and supportive social support programs. And lastly, being reproductive access. So when we're talking about reproductive access, we mean wraparound care for all stages of family planning, reproductive health, and choice. So this includes accessible and affordable prenatal care for expecting parents, access to and informed choices regarding contraception, equipping individuals with the tools necessary for informed family planning, and wraparound unrestricted access to all reproductive health care. So why do we center reproductive health care as a priority for violence prevention? The answer really is simple. Research continues to show that reproductive health access and violence are deeply interconnected public health issues. And at its core, reproductive access is violence prevention because when people do not have choices about what happens to their bodies, those at risk or victim survivors who have already experienced violence can become trapped in abusive situations and increasing their dependency on harm doers. Deeply concerning is also that approximately 20% of pregnant individuals experience some form of violence during pregnancy, with homicide being the leading cause of death among pregnant individuals. We also know that abusers often manipulate systems to work against victim survivors, using those very systems to further control and punish them for circumstances that are far beyond their control. So knowing all of this, that is why we are super proud to have partnered and worked alongside If, How, When to address some of the current challenges in Nevada's reproductive access statutes. And Chair, if it's okay, I'd like to pass it over to Sarah Answorth from If, How, When to go over a few specific statutes that are priorities of the Economic Justice Work Group, and then we'll stand for any questions at the end.
Yes, please go ahead. Do we have her here?
Yes, I'm here. I'm just having a little screen sharing problem. Hello, Chair and members of the committee. I'm grateful to be here today. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen and get started right away. Okay, just confirming everyone can see that. Great, thank you. Well, good morning, and thank you so much for hosting us today to talk with you about this really important issue. My name is Sarah Ainsworth. I'm an attorney and the Chief Legal and Policy Director at If, When, How, Lawyering for Reproductive Justice. I'm going to talk today briefly about what our organization does, so you know, and then also speak about 2 specific Nevada laws that put people at risk for criminalization as a result of abortion or pregnancy loss. And then I'll have some time for questions, and you can also ask Serena questions as well. So quickly about If, When, How, we are a national nonprofit legal organization. We work to provide legal services for people as to their reproductive lives. We defend people who've been criminalized for losing a pregnancy or having an abortion. And we work closely with state legislators and state advocates around the country to ensure that laws on the books that could criminalize people are removed, and that positive laws are passed to help ensure that people access health care, not criminalization, when they experience a pregnancy outcome. We also provide Repro Legal Helpline, which is the only nationwide free legal services helpline. We speak with people in every state and the US territories, including Nevada. Since the Dobbs decision came down, we have counseled over 12,000 people throughout the United States. Specifically in Nevada, we have supported local attorneys in their work to defend people who've been criminalized under the statute that I'm going to speak about today. And we also are working closely with state advocates like Serena and others who testified before you today to ask you to repeal the last self-managed abortion crime in the United States. So I'll quickly go over what the statutes are that we're concerned about today and their impact that they have had on people in Nevada. So first of all, as you all know, in Nevada, abortion is lawfully protected and it is also accessible. Nonetheless, Nevada retains and prosecutors have utilized a law that makes it a crime of manslaughter for a person to end their own pregnancy after 24 weeks of pregnancy. Nevada also has another antiquated law that makes it a misdemeanor crime to conceal the birth of a child, a serious misdemeanor, a gross misdemeanor. So since 2018, at least 2 Nevadans have been criminalized for allegedly ending their own pregnancy. We don't know if there are more because each county keeps its own records and it's not easy to determine whether or not a person perhaps was charged, threatened, arrested, and never charged. But we know of at least 2. And what this crime for self-managed abortion does is put anyone, whether they ended their own pregnancy, whether before 24 weeks or after, or whether they had a miscarriage or a stillbirth, but especially a later pregnancy loss, at risk of being investigated, arrested, and even prosecuted for a felony. And as Serena talked about, it also hands abusive partners a tool, and they have been emboldened since the loss of the federal protection for the abortion right in every state. It hands them another tool of control. And in fact, in one of the cases that we've seen in Nevada, it was in fact the abusive partner who contacted the police and accused his partner of this crime in retaliation for an arrest for assault against her. No charges were ultimately filed against her, but she was still arrested and she was still investigated and had to go through that terrible experience. So as I've explained before, the law sweeps in people who miscarry or have stillbirths. One of them, who is probably known to you, her name at the time was Patience Frazier. She goes by a new last name now. She was a mother of 3 who experienced a stillbirth. She honored her lost baby with a memorial that she shared on Facebook, and then she was targeted for arrest, investigation, and ultimately prosecution under the self-managed abortion crime. As a result of her wrongful prosecution and conviction, the state of Nevada ultimately paid her $100,000. While that's a significant amount, surely, for the state, nothing can make up for the years she spent in prison before her conviction was overturned, the time away from her children, and the public humiliation that honestly continues to this day. So I want to share a little bit about what other states have done, because I think that's important to let you all know. So the vast majority of states never had a crime like this on the books. And when I say never, I mean never in the history of the United States. Even before abortion began to be criminalized in the late 1800s and on into the early 20th century, the vast majority of states never made it a crime to have an abortion. They criminalized abortion providers. So as of 2018, only 7 states in the United States had a law like Nevada's self-managed abortion crime. And since 2018, all of the other states except Nevada have done away with them. So briefly, to kind of explain a little bit, New York and Delaware both passed positive statutes that reinforced access to abortion and abortion rights, and in those statutes repealed the self-managed abortion crimes. Other states who have chosen to ban abortion since the Dobbs decision repealed their self-managed abortion crimes as a result of their legislation that banned abortion entirely, but exempts pregnant people, people who have abortions, from any kind of criminalization. So as of all the states that ban abortion at this time, and there are currently 13 states enforcing abortion bans and one that's going back and forth. As you know, this is evolving constantly in the state courts. None of those states allow the prosecution of a person for having an abortion. The crimes are targeted at providers. So in Oklahoma and South Carolina, they banned abortion and they repealed their self-managed abortion crime, and that's still true today. Arizona did the same thing, but then an Arizona court enjoined their abortion ban. So while abortion is allowed in Arizona today, their self-managed abortion crime is still off the books. And then in Idaho, the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals upheld a permanent injunction against their self-managed abortion crime back in 2015. And then when they banned abortion, they repealed a whole host of statutes, and this one is repealed by implication. And so just really quickly, in Oklahoma, people in Oklahoma followed up by asking the Attorney General to confirm, is it in fact true? Did the legislature intend to do this? And the Attorney General in 2023 in Oklahoma confirmed, indeed. And then as I put on the slide, noted that historically in Oklahoma and nationwide, pregnant women have not been prosecuted for seeking, obtaining, or inducing an abortion. So now Nevada is the only state with such a law that makes self-managed abortion a crime. And then as to the other statute, concealing birth has a pretty different history. Currently, only 16 states have a statute like that. Those statutes are antiquated statutes that are colonial era and actually were pre-colonial. They came over from England. And it was a colonial era crime used to criminalize women for having out of wedlock births. The crimes are very specific to that. And indeed, Massachusetts' concealing birth still uses that language of out of wedlock births. The theory was that if someone had had a baby and hid that fact, they couldn't, and the baby wasn't either maybe had died as a stillbirth, that perhaps the woman had killed the infant to hide the fact of its birth. So this law allowed prosecutors to bring very serious charges against women without having to prove that a homicide actually occurred. So this crime is antiquated, meaning it no longer appears in the United States Uniform Criminal Code, which is, as you know, because you're legislators look to for updates often to ensure that their criminal codes are up to date and to see trends around the United States. So really what we have now is a law still on the books, and its only modern use is to go after people who experienced a miscarriage or a stillbirth for criminalization of what happened to them. This is a picture of Ann Bynum. This happened to her in Arkansas. Her conviction was ultimately overturned on appeal. So basically what happens is these crimes being on the books increase the risk that some people will be criminalized for abortion or pregnancy loss. And I say some people because some people are never likely to come into the crosshairs of the criminal legal system because they experienced a pregnancy loss. We have learned from our studies over time and from our own caseload that the vast majority of people who are targeted are living in poverty. They are experiencing economic insecurity when this happens to them. They are often very young. They are disproportionately women of color. They are disproportionately immigrants. And they, instead of getting a healthcare response to a healthcare issue, they are instead criminalized. And it is that criminalization that in fact undermines public health because it scares people from seeking care when they need it the most. And for that reason, every major medical group in the United States, from the American Medical Association to the American College of Obstetricians and Gynecologists, to the American Public Health Association, explicitly oppose the criminalization of people for abortion or pregnancy loss. I did send these slides to you all for so that you had them, but since I sent them, there's a now update, which I'll skip to here, breaking news. The Nevada State Medical Association also specifically adopted this opinion last week. They passed a resolution saying that no person should be penalized, prosecuted, or subjected to adverse action based on their pregnancy outcomes. And they are calling for the repeal of these two crimes. So that is the end of my presentation, and the summary is simply that no one should be criminalized for their pregnancy outcomes, and we should repeal both of these crimes. And both Serena and I can take any questions that you have now, and thank you so much for your time today.
Thank you for your time today. We appreciate you being here and presenting all that information to us. Are there questions in Las Vegas? All right, Vice Chair Miller.
Thank you so much, Chair. And thank you for the presentation. Again, always bringing awareness to some of these things that we're just not aware are occurring. And I have two brief questions. First, I just want to make sure that I understand, is the term self-managed abortion being used? Because I know medically an abortion is what we consider a miscarriage. Is that what we're using, so that a self-managed abortion would not be a natural abortion of the baby, a miscarriage as we would call it, but as a choice when someone chooses to go get a medically performed abortion?
Yes, I'll make one more distinction there.
And if you could just say your name for the record. Sorry.
Oh, yes, I'm sorry. This is Sarah Ainsworth, and I'm happy to answer that question. So I'll make one further distinction. As you know, we use the medical term is abortion for the end of a pregnancy. A spontaneous abortion is the term typically used for an unplanned miscarriage that happens without anyone's involvement. A self-managed abortion is when somebody ends their pregnancy on their own, typically outside the medical system or through a telehealth abortion. And those are almost exclusively in the United States done with the use of the same abortion pills a person might get at a clinic. And then there's a clinic-based abortion, which could be both pills or a medical procedure. And so when I say specifically self-managed abortion, I'm using it in the same way the statute uses it, where if somebody does something to themselves, takes a medicine or something else to end their own pregnancy. I hope that helps.
It does help. Thank you so much for that, because I know there's also even the distinction between a medical abortion and a DNC. And again, because what the medical community uses and what we use just as laymen are often muddles the issue. So thank you for that. My next question is, obviously this is a concern. I mean, it remains a concern that some of the most personal and sensitive experiences that women will have in their lifetime always comes up for, government and other people to believe that it's their business. And so my question is, when I see that concern about repealing this because of, again, miscarriages and stillbirths, I want to ask two other scenarios, just so that I understand, or others understand the breadth of where this could go. Would you believe that there would be a concern for, again, there are oftentimes a stillbirth, but often as well as when the child is born and then an immediate death after birth, whether it's, hours, days, sometimes, and as well as, do you believe this could potentially impact like private closed adoptions, where again, a girl or a woman has a baby, choosing to put that baby up for adoption, concealing that because that is, their private right and business. Do you see where it could impact that as well?
I'm really glad you asked those questions, because in fact, we have seen impact in both kinds of circumstances. So the woman that whose conviction was overturned in Arkansas had in fact not concealed the birth of her stillborn baby from the hospital or from medical providers, but she had not told her mother, whom she lived with, that she was pregnant. And that was the basis for her conviction. And the Arkansas Court of Appeals took issue with that. But the jury unfortunately did not. So she had to go through this terrible proceeding. And really, because her plan was to give this baby up for adoption. She had another child she was taking care of, and she was afraid she'd lose her housing if she informed her mother that she was pregnant and having another baby. So she had been hiding that fact from her. And then as to the other situation, yes, we have seen people accused of doing something, or accused essentially when they've had a stillbirth that the baby was born alive and wasn't a stillbirth. And what that looks like in our cases is typically we have to make sure that we have evidence to show that, in fact, this was a stillbirth and no one did anything untoward. It was just a tragic loss. What that means is a great deal of expense, forensic pathologists, et cetera. So defending people costs a significant amount of money in order to defend them as they deserve. And yes, as you pointed out, in every one of these situations, someone is experiencing something very private that in almost every state is simply not the subject of the criminal legal system.
Quick follow-up here. Thank you for that. I'd also, as we're discussing this, my concern would also stretch to women who choose to carry babies for other people, to be a surrogate. And again, that's a beautiful choice, but it's something that people may want to keep private. So I just want to make sure that we're considering all of the scenarios around pregnancy and childbirth. And so thank you for that.
All right, Senator Nguyen.
Thank you for the presentation. Obviously, I have some questions and concerns about some other potential examples. When you look at the current state of the statute that only exists here in the state of Nevada, could this potentially criminalize and look at the actions of all pregnant women that maybe don't have access to prenatal care or prenatal education or other resources? Is there anything could potentially cover someone who takes Advil, not realizing you're not supposed to take ibuprofen when you're pregnant because they get a headache? Isn't that correct?
It is absolutely correct, and it is in line with the things that we have seen around the country in other states. While the statute has very specific language, and you might say, well, it's cabined at post 24 weeks, it's cabined at a medication. The fact is that medication is not defined in the statute. It could include all kinds of things. And we know that people often harshly judge pregnant women for using certain things during pregnancy, or even what they eat or how they exercise. And so we have seen, in fact, prosecutions look at what people have done as if it were sometimes a criminal act, even when it is clearly not. And also 24 weeks, it has to be proved, right? It's a fact, it's an element of the statute. So somebody who might be near that, might not be near that, could still come under investigation or prosecution. So it's a very dangerous statute for both the people it explicitly seems to target, but for everyone else that could fall under its gamut.
Thank you.
Other questions here in Las Vegas? Not seeing any. We will go to Carson City. Any questions? Not seeing any. And on Zoom. All right, not seeing any. Thank you so much again for your presentation and for answering all of our questions. That will close out agenda item number 4 and take us to agenda item number 6, the moment you have all been waiting for, our work session. At this time, I will turn it over to our illustrious policy analyst, Mr. Melgarejo, to walk us through the work session document.
Thank you, Chair. For the record, Cesar Melgarejo, Committee Policy Analyst and Senior Principal Policy Analyst with the Research Division of the Legislative Council Bureau. As nonpartisan staff, I can neither advocate for nor against a measure that comes before this committee. The work session document, which is available to the public here, and we have printed copies and available online, is designed to assist the committee in determining the actions it wishes to take. The committee may vote to approve the recommendations as provided in the work session document, approve it with amendments, combine recommendations where appropriate, or take no action. As a reminder, the committee can request 15 legislative measures, 10 related to the judiciary generally, and not more than 5 may relate to juvenile justice issues. The committee can also request or approve sending letters or place a position statement in the final report to address specific topics. There is no limitation in the number of letters or position statements that the committee may adopt. Chair, I will present the recommendations in the order which they appear. The first recommendation requests drafting legislation to authorize jails and detention facilities to create a voluntary delayed release program for individuals released from jail or detention facilities during overnight hours. The recommendation includes 3 components outlined in paragraphs A1 through A3. And Chair, that concludes recommendation number 1.
All right. Any questions on recommendation number 1? Not seeing any, I would accept a motion to approve.
So moved.
We have a motion from Vice Chair Miller. We have a second from Senator Nguyen. Any discussion on the motion? Not seeing any. All in favor say aye. Aye. Any opposed? Nay. All right. Passes unanimously. We will approve recommendation number 1 and move to recommendation number 2.
Thank you, Chair. For the record, Cesar Magro, Committee Policy Analyst. Next recommendation, recommendation number 2, request drafting legislation concerning the definition, use, oversight, and reporting of solitary confinement in Nevada correctional facilities. The recommendation includes 6 components outlined in paragraphs A through F. And Chair, that concludes recommendation number 2.
Any questions on this recommendation? Not seeing any, I would accept a motion to approve.
So moved.
We have a motion from Vice Chair Miller. We have a second from Senator Nguyen. Any discussion on the motion? Not seeing any. All in favor say aye. Aye. Any opposed? Nay. All right. Sounds like a unanimous passage of recommendation number 2 as well. And that will take us to recommendation number 3.
Thank you, Chair. For the record, Cesar Magro, Committee Policy Analyst. Recommendation number 3 requests the drafting of 2 individual letters. The first letter concerns access to counsel for persons in custody, and the second letter addresses funding to reduce reliance on solitary confinement. The recommendation includes the 2 letters, which are outlined in paragraphs A and B. And Chair, that concludes recommendation number 3.
Any questions on this recommendation? I don't see any, so I would accept a motion to approve.
So moved.
We have a motion from Vice Chair Miller and a second from Senator Nguyen. Any discussion on the motion? I'm not seeing any. All in favor say aye. Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Nay. All right, we've approved this recommendation. That takes us to the next recommendation.
Thank you, Chair. For the record, Cesar Magro, Community Policy Analyst. The 4th recommendation requests drafting legislation to recognize certified domestic violence advocates as qualified third parties who may sign affidavits supporting lease termination. Chair, that concludes recommendation number 4.
All right, I think we have a question from Assemblymember Hansen. Go ahead.
Thank you, Chair. I just wanted to see if we could get someone to clarify what exactly does it mean a certified domestic violence advocate? Like, what are the qualifications to qualify them to be one of those third parties?
Great question. I'm going to go to legal first, if they can answer that question. Give us just a moment.
Thank you, Chair. Bradley Wilkinson, Committee Counsel. That is a good question, and we were hoping to hear from Mr. Horn today to see exactly what they had in mind, because it was not clear to us who those people are.
Would it be fair to say, Mr. Wilkinson, that even if we approve the BDR today, we could further clarify in the drafting process what those qualifications would be in order to become certified, and we could work with the coalition and legal staff to draft requirements?
Yes, Chair, that is all quite true. We would certainly do that, just as a matter of drafting to make sure we nail down exactly the definition that we want to use for that term.
Thank you. And I think you had mentioned that this was a recommendation from Safe Nest. I don't know if they have somebody here today who can answer those questions. I will tell you all, I told all of our presenters that we didn't need them to come back today. So I do see somebody who's thinking about coming forward to answer a question. So it looks like he's decided to come forward and shed some light on this. So thank you, Mr. Horn.
Good morning, Madam Chair, members of the committee. For the record, my name is William Horn with Western Public Affairs, representing Safe Nest. And yes, unfortunately, Ms. Ortenberger is traveling through the state right now, driving. So I don't have the exact definition of what a certified advocate is. At this time, we definitely will work with LCB on getting that, but these are advocates who work directly with victims of domestic violence in our court system, et cetera, and they are trained. I don't know what the certification process exactly is, but they are trained, and then they would be able to give those affidavits, sign for those affidavits to prevent these survivors from being evicted, et cetera, and doing that. So that's the purpose of this request of a BDR. And we will narrow that definition down during the drafting process, Madam Chair.
Thank you so much. All right. Unless we have further questions from Carson City, I will come back down here to Las Vegas and Vice Chair Miller.
Thank you, Chair. My question is, who currently has the legal ability to sign these affidavits for lease termination, eviction protection, and emergency relocation?
For the record, William Horn. Is my understanding is that it's the survivors that are submitting these affidavits, and it's not always readily available, or it's a traumatic experience for them, et cetera, and seeking these affidavits. Also, if you put yourself in the position of the landlord, for instance, and you have your tenant saying that I'm a survivor of domestic violence, that's why, I signed this affidavit and I don't wish to be evicted at this time. If you have a third party doing it, saying, yes, we were part of this proceeding, et cetera, we're working with this person, and I'm signing this affidavit attesting to these facts that this person fits within the protections of being evicted.
I think legal might also be able to weigh in here. Thank you, Mr. Horn.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, there are a number of ways you can provide that a victim can provide the necessary proof in the written notice that's given to the landlord. And that's in NRS 118A.345. One thing would be copy of order for protection. Another is a copy of a written report from a law enforcement agency. And then the third one is the written affidavit in the correct format that's signed by a qualified third party. And then qualified third party is actually defined in the statute as a physician licensed to practice in the state, a psychiatrist licensed to practice, a psychologist, social worker, registered nurse, marriage and family therapist, or well, jump down here, member of the clergy of a church or religious society. And then the last one, which is that issue here, is any person who's employed by an agency or service which advises persons regarding domestic violence or refers them to persons or agencies where their requests and needs can be met, and who is licensed to provide healthcare pursuant to the provisions of Title 54 of NRS, or is a member of the board of directors, or serves as the executive director of the agency or service, who's received training relating to domestic violence, and who's a resident of this state. So that the agency is limited to those people, someone who's a healthcare provider, member of the board, or the executive director. And this proposal would expand it to the certified domestic violence advocate who could act as the qualified third party.
Thank you for that. I look forward to hearing more in regular session about the qualifications and the training around these certified practitioners. Thank you.
All right. Thank you, everybody. Unless there are further questions,
Chair?
I would accept. Oh, there are. Was that Assemblymember Hanson? Please go ahead.
And I'm sorry, this would probably be more appropriate after the motion for discussion on the motion. But just to clarify, I just really wanted to, I'm in support of moving this forward. Of course, that's what's wonderful about this process. We still have time, we have drafting, we have the session to vet and get a lot of these questions answered. And, you know, Safe Nest and our domestic violence advocates in the state of Nevada have been so wonderful in doing some great work. And so I don't want to diminish their ability to be involved in this at all. I just, a little history, we had this kind of a situation with DUI schools come before us with a regulation at LegCom that created quite a kind of a problem. So that's why I'm being a little particular about checking into these. What are the qualifications? Because it could either hinder or it could help, and then how that language really lays out is super important. So that was what was behind. Is I'm a little gun shy from a regulation that kind of got through that caused some issues for my constituents in the rural. So thank you for the indulgence and for letting me be able to ask the question and put my support to move the measure forward so far. Thank you.
All right, thank you so much. With that, I would accept a motion to approve this recommendation.
So moved.
We have a motion from Vice Chair Miller. We have a second from Senator Nguyen. Any discussion on the motion? Favor say aye. Aye.
Aye.
Opposed, nay. All right, the motion carries to approve this recommendation. And that takes us to the next recommendation.
Thank you, Chair. For the record, Cesar Magrejo, Committee Policy Analyst. The fifth recommendation requests drafting legislation concerning safety standards and regulation of electric bicycles, electric scooters, electric motorcycles, and other electric devices. The recommendation includes the 7 components outlined in paragraphs A through G. And Chair, that concludes the recommendation.
All right, any questions on this recommendation? This did come out of the study that we conducted pursuant to AB4 of the special session. And I don't see any questions. So I would accept a motion to approve.
So moved.
All right, we have a motion from Vice Chair Miller. We have a second from Senator Nguyen. Any discussion on the motion? Not seeing any. All in favor say aye. Aye. Any opposed?
Aye.
Nay. All right, I think. Can we confirm Assemblymember Gonzalez that you're an aye?
Yes, aye.
Okay, thank you. Just want to make sure we get our record correct. And we unanimously approved this recommendation, and that will take us to the next recommendation.
Thank you, Chair. For the record, Cesar Magrejo, Committee Policy Analyst. Recommendation number 6 requests drafting legislation concerning debt-based driver's license suspensions and supervision fees for persons on parole, probation, or residential confinement. The recommendation includes the 2 components outlined in paragraphs A and B. And Chair, that concludes recommendation 6.
Any questions on recommendation 6? Yes, Assemblymember Cole.
Thank you, Chair. So my question is on the civil traffic citations. I don't remember what year it was because I was not an assembly person at the time, but fairly recently there was a change where the fees and everything were associated with a criminal violation rather than a civil. So is this meant to eliminate things that were based on criminal, like in the past, or going forward, or how does that work? Because currently a civil would be reckless driving, speeding kind of thing. Is that correct?
I don't know if legal wants to weigh in here or wants me to respond. But I think the intention here, oh, go ahead, Mr. Wilkinson.
Oh, no, that's okay. You can go ahead if you want.
Okay. When we did pass the bill to decriminalize numerous traffic citations, the intention of the legislature, and anybody else who was there can correct me if I'm wrong, was also to eliminate the revocation of driver's license based on somebody's failure to pay their fines. That bill was passed at the same time as another bill that did not include that provision. And so the purpose of this recommendation is to restore the original intent of the larger policy proposal, which was to both decriminalize certain traffic citations and ensure that individuals are not having their license revoked simply for failure to pay fines. I think that accurately reflects the purpose of the recommendation.
Okay. So this probably could be after the motion, but I think my concern would be that we currently have situations where people are continuing to speed, and whether it's 70 or 80 miles an hour, they're definitely dangerous to society. So I would be concerned about this bill. Thank you.
Thank you. I'll also just point out that the points on their record would still accumulate, and there are still sanctions for having too many points on your record. This will just eliminate the specific sanction of removing their driving privileges for the specific violation of not paying their fees.
Thank you.
Any other questions on this measure? All right. I don't see any. So at this point, I would accept a motion to approve.
So moved.
All right. We have a motion from Vice Chair Miller, a second from Senator Nguyen. Any further discussion on the motion? Not seeing any. All in favor say aye. 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 Any opposed, nay? All right, this measure also carries. And that takes us to the next recommendation.
Thank you, Chair. Cesar Mogurejo, Community Policy Analyst. For the record, recommendation number 7 requests drafting legislation concerning statewide data collection, enforcement, victim protections, and services related to human trafficking. The recommendation includes 10 components outlined in paragraphs A through J. In addition, there's another recommendation that was proposed to the committee that's not included in the work session document today, which is to move the state of Nevada Human Trafficking Coalition under the responsibility of the Office of the Attorney General. And Chair, that concludes recommendation number 7.
All right, any questions on recommendation number 7? Not seeing any, I would accept a motion to approve.
So moved.
We have a motion from Vice Chair Miller, a second from Senator Nguyen. Any discussion on the motion? Not seeing any. All in favor say aye. Aye. Any opposed, nay? All right, this motion carries. And that takes us to our next recommendation.
Thank you, Chair. For the record, Cesar Mogurejo, Community Policy Analyst. Recommendation number 8 requests the drafting of 2 individual letters related to funding and financing for human trafficking prevention, victim services, and billing structures for residential programs. The recommendation includes both components in paragraphs A and B. And Chair, that concludes recommendation 8.
Any questions on this recommendation? I don't see any. So I would accept a motion to approve.
So
All right, we have a motion and a second. I'll take the motion from Senator Nguyen and the second from Vice Chair Miller. Any discussion on the motion? Not seeing any. All in favor say aye. Aye. Any opposed? Nay? Any opposed, nay? All right, we have approved recommendation number 8. Moving on to the next recommendation.
Thank you, Chair. For the record, Cesar Mogurejo, Community Policy Analyst. Recommendation 9 requests the drafting of a letter concerning public defense staffing and support services, and the recommendation includes both components A and B, and that concludes recommendation 9.
Any questions on recommendation 9? I don't see any, so I'd accept a motion to approve.
So moved. Second.
We have a motion from Vice Chair Miller. We have a second from Senator Nguyen. Any discussion on the motion? Not seeing any. All in favor say aye. Aye. Any opposed? Nay. All right. Motion carries to approve recommendation number 9. On to recommendation number 10.
Thank you, Chair. For the record, Cesar Mogurejo, Community Policy Analyst. Recommendation number 10, request drafting legislation concerning post-conviction representation for indigent defendants by the Department of Indigent Defense Services. And that concludes recommendation number 10.
Any questions on recommendation number 10? I don't see any, so I'd accept a motion to approve.
So moved.
All right, we have a motion from Vice Chair Miller. We have a second from Senator Nguyen. Any discussion on the motion? Not seeing any. All in favor say aye. Aye. Any opposed?
Aye.
Any opposed? Nay. I don't see. Sorry. The motion carries. That brings us to the next recommendation.
Thank you, Chair. For the record, Cesar Margarejo, Committee Policy Analyst. Recommendation number 11, request drafting legislation concerning the duration of juvenile competency proceedings. And Chair, that concludes recommendation 11.
Any questions on this recommendation? Assemblymember Cole.
Thank you, Chair. So my question would be, if at the end of 6 months they cannot attain competency, they're just released into the community at that point? Is that what would happen? Or is there some additional process that goes through, like, I don't know, involuntary confinement, something like that?
Again, seeing as I told all of our presenters that they didn't have to be here at the work session, I will try to speak for them, and I'm sure they can clarify if I get this wrong, but they would not be released directly to the community. Their criminal case would be closed, but they would still have to go through whatever process they're going through to receive treatment at a mental health care facility and then be, reintegrated into their family and into their community.
Thank you.
Thank you. Any further questions? All right, not seeing any, I would accept a motion to approve this recommendation.
So moved.
We have a motion from Vice Chair Miller. We have a second from Senator Nguyen. Any discussion on the motion? All right. All in favor say aye. Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Nay. All right. We have one nay from Assemblymember Cole, and the motion carries. That takes us to our next recommendation, number 12.
Thank you, Chair. For the record, Cesar Margarejo, Committee Policy Analyst. Recommendation number 12, request drafting legislation concerning the time a youth may remain in juvenile detention while awaiting transfer to a state correctional facility. And Chair, that concludes recommendation number 12.
All right. Any questions on recommendation number 12? I'm not seeing any. So I would accept a motion to approve.
So moved.
We have a motion from Vice Chair Miller. We have a second from Senator Nguyen. Any discussion on the motion? Not seeing any. All in favor say aye. Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Nay. All right, the motion carries. And that takes us to our next recommendation.
Thank you, Chair. For the record, Cesar Margarejo, Committee Policy Analyst. Recommendation number 13, request drafting legislation concerning deadlines for court-ordered evaluations of youth who remain in detention. And Chair, that concludes recommendation 13.
Any questions on recommendation 13? I don't see any. So I would take a motion to approve.
So moved.
All right, we have a motion from Vice Chair Miller, a second from Senator Nguyen. Any discussion on the motion? Not seeing any. All in favor say aye.
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 Any opposed? Nay. The motion carries. We'll move on to our next recommendation.
Thank you, Chair. For the record, Cesar Margarejo, Committee Policy Analyst. Recommendation 14, request drafting legislation concerning certain young offenders whose sentences will expire before they reach 26 years of age. And Chair, that concludes recommendation 14.
All right, any questions on recommendation 14? Vice Chair Miller.
Thank you, Chair. When it refers to establish a program, is this a program for training for reentry, early release? What is the program? Well, I guess you wouldn't need early release. Well, I'm asking.
My recollection is this would be a housing program so that we could have a separate, or I shouldn't say separate, but a designated facility for offenders who are not necessarily juveniles or meet the definition of youthful, but who are less than 26 years of age.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions? Not seeing any, I would accept a motion to approve recommendation 14.
So moved.
We have a motion from Vice Chair Miller. We have a second from Senator Nguyen. Any discussion on the motion? All right, all in favor say aye. Aye. Any opposed, nay? All right, the motion carries, and that takes us to recommendation 15.
Thank you, Chair. For the record, Cesar Mogarejo, Committee Policy Analyst. Recommendation 15 requests drafting legislation concerning standards for government use of automated license plate reader systems. And Chair, that concludes recommendation 15.
All right, questions on recommendation 15, starting with Vice Chair Miller.
Thank you, Chair. I do not want this to open into a hearing because I know there's a lot of questions and concerns, and we hear a lot from the public on this and issues that we've seen not just locally but nationally as well with this, especially around the abuse and misuse of this type of technology by officers. And of course, you know, constitutional infringement. So my question is, when it says, a twofold question. One, is the point of this to enact standards and regulations on a program that is right now not regulated so that there would be some standards and best practices in place? That's my first question.
My understanding is yes, but I want to kick it over to legal to make sure that I'm not missing some area of statute.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, that is exactly correct. There are no standards in place right now. So what this would do is establish those standards for agencies to follow.
And my second question with that, thank you, is to adopt written policies. Would the agencies, would each different jurisdiction themselves be creating their own policies, or would this be, we would be legislating policies that, so who's writing these policies? Because I know there's different approaches and opinions even within Nevada from different jurisdictions.
Yes, that is true. The Model Act there has most of that information about what the content of the policies is supposed to include. I'm not sure to what extent there's leeway for an agency to depart from what's contained in the Model Act, but most of the standards are going to be right there in the Model Act.
Okay, thank you for that. I would just like to say, Chair, that I would like to make sure that if this moves forward, that we are legislating specifically what we expect to be followed. Thank you.
Understood. And I think we also have a question, sorry, other questions down here before I go to our friends from afar. I will go now to Assemblymember Hanson.
Thank you, Chair. I think I've got some of the clarification from my colleague's question. So we also call these flock cameras. So the thing is, I guess what I was a little confused by is we're going to have a BDR for these guardrails, but we've not passed any legislation legalizing reading of license plates for like citations. So in some ways, to me, it was like the cart before the horse. But if it's flock cameras that are currently used, for those of you in the legal field, make sure I'm understanding this right. We use these kind of cameras. We can't use them for citations, but we can use them after the fact if a crime has occurred and there's maybe some evidence on them. Is that, do I have that understanding right?
Sure, I can answer that. I think the point of them, they're used for investigatory purposes primarily. It can't be used as a red light camera or, definitive proof of running a red light, for example, but rather, used for investigating a wide variety of crimes, involving movement of people, movement of vehicles, locations at which people were. But no, it's not, used specifically as evidence in a citation, although, that could come into play at some point.
Okay, thank you for that. And so, yeah, Chair, I guess, I'll support moving it forward with the idea that I think we're going to have a whole lot of discussion in the next session on this subject in particular, and guardrails are important. So thank you for letting me try to get some clarity. I appreciate it.
Of course. And I think I actually have two kind of clarifying questions as well, which is that my understanding is that, absent any law that prohibits the use of flock cameras or license plate readers, there's nothing to prohibit law enforcement agencies, private security companies, other agencies or entities from installing these cameras. So there are no rules in place at this point in time, right?
Yes, Chair, that is correct. There are not any statutes that pertain specifically to this kind of camera.
And it was also my understanding in, choosing to bring this proposal forward that we do not have any other committees that are currently considering legislation on this issue. I don't know if that's something that. Okay, I'm getting some confirmation here that other committees have declined to take up this issue. So I thought that to my colleague Assemblymember Hansen's point, there will be much discussion on this, and it seemed appropriate to at least have a vehicle to hash out those details. And if we're able to come to some kind of conclusion about how we should be regulating the use of these cameras, then we can do that with this particular bill. And with that, I'll take any other questions, but not seeing any. We'll move to a motion, if there is one, to approve this recommendation. All right, we have a motion from Senator Nguyen. We have a second from Vice Chair Miller. Any discussion on the motion? All right, not seeing any. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Nay. Okay, that motion carries, and we will move now to our next recommendation.
Thank you, Chair. For the record, Cesar Mogarejo, Committee Policy Analyst. Recommendation 16 requests drafting legislation concerning evaluations, specialty court probation, and geriatric parole eligibility. The recommendation includes the three components outlined in paragraphs A through C. And Chair, that concludes recommendation 16.
Any questions on this one? Assemblymember Cole.
So my question is on sub-item C. So I guess my question is there a certain amount of minimum time that the people would serve under vehicular homicide or habitual criminals before they're considered for geriatric parole? Because my concern would be, they commit the crime at 64 or 65 or whatever that age is, and then they get out. Thank you.
I'm going to ask legal to weigh in here because I'm not qualified to answer that. And of course, I sent all of our presenters away, so we have nobody else to answer questions for us.
So, Chair, I'm not sure I understand that question. Could you please repeat that?
Happy to. So my question was related to how the parole process works for geriatric. They're convicted of vehicular homicide or habitual criminals. We're removing the exclusion pursuant to this C in the BDR request. How does that work? Is there a minimum amount of time that they would serve of their sentence before they would be eligible for parole? Or is it immediately when they hit a particular age? If so, what is that age? Thank you.
Yes, multiple people have pointed out that the statute NRS 213.12155 in subsection 1, paragraph E, has the requirement for eligibility that a person have served at least the majority of the maximum term or maximum aggregate term of his or her sentence. So that requirement would remain in law, even if the other exclusionary crimes that are proposed here were removed from paragraph A of subsection 1.
Okay, thank you so much. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. All right, any other questions? Not seeing any, I would accept a motion to approve. All right, we have a motion from Vice Chair Miller. We have a second from Senator Nguyen. Any discussion on the motion?
Yes, Chair.
Yes. All right. I think that was Assemblymember Hanson.
Yes, thank you. Sorry, I couldn't type quick enough. I'm comfortable with A and B in this BDR proposal. I'm not real comfortable with C, so I unfortunately am going to be no on this one.
All right. Any other discussion? Not seeing any. All in favor say aye. Aye. Any opposed, nay?
Nay.
All right. I think we just, okay. We have 2 nays, just because we have to keep the record. Assemblymember Cole and Assemblymember Hanson. And maybe
I'm a nay also. I apologize.
That's okay.
No, I'm a nay.
Got it. So we have 3 nays. The rest are ayes. And with that, the motion does still carry to approve this recommendation. And that takes us to, is it our final recommendation? 17. Please take it away.
Thank you, Chair. For the record, Cesar Melgarejo, Community Policy Analyst. Recommendation 17 requests drafting legislation concerning the use of prone restraints by peace officers. And should that concludes recommendation 17 and the recommendations in the work session document.
All right, any questions on this recommendation? I don't see any, so I'd accept a motion to approve.
So moved.
All right, we have a motion from Vice Chair Miller. We have a second from Senator Nguyen. Any discussion on the motion? Not seeing any. All in favor say aye. Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed, nay? All right, the motion carries. We have approved recommendation number 17, and I think that takes us to the end of our work session document, correct? All right, that brings us to the end of this agenda item, and we will move on to the next item on our agenda, which is our second period of public comment. We invite anybody wishing to give public comment in person in Carson City or Las Vegas to the front. But I don't see anybody coming forward in either location, so we'll go to the phones for public comment.
To provide public comment, please press star 9 now to take your place in the queue. Chair, we have no callers wishing to provide public comment.
Okay, then that brings us to agenda item number 8. As we get ready to adjourn, I just want to thank our committee members for their commitment over this interim to passing some, or to assessing some many issues and coming up with these recommendations out of our work session document. And equally, I want to thank our staff. We have incredible staff at LCB, as you all know. Our administrator, Kathleen Capron, our committee policy analyst, Cesar Melgarejo, our committee counsel, Bradley Wilkinson, our secretary, Maria Velasquez, and so many other members of our staff who I don't have their names in front of me, but we have amazing staff at ABH. We have our other analysts and secretaries who have been filling in and helping. We have all of our staff at LCB Legal, our finance staff, our research staff, and I just want to thank all of you so much for all of your hard work over this interim. And with that, unless there are other comments, questions, all right, then that takes us to agenda item number 8. We are adjourned.
Thank you so much, Chair. See you all soon.